Well, even after deburring the hole, it was still kind of tight, so I changed to a number 11 drill, and that seems to be a good clearance hole. So I'm going to re-drill the, run that number 12 through here. Alright, I already had determined that I needed a number 21 drill for the tap drill size on this. Double check just to make sure it wasn't in the wrong place. 0.156, that's it. Alright, unlike those through holes in the thin pieces, I am going to use the center drill on this. And let's see, I think I'll bring the table a little bit more. It should be okay. That's better. Alright, now I want to set my depth stop because, remember, I want these to be blind holes, but because of the taper at the end of the drill, I'm going to drill pretty much as deep as I can without coming out the other side. I think what I'm going to do, bring the little bit over here, touch off on the top. You know, I was going to use the quill stop, and I still can, but it occurred to me it might even be easier to just raise the knee the depth that I want the hole. What I did was I set the quill stop so it's just above the surface. This bag, so it's lined up. Bring my knee up the depth that I want. Now, of course, I don't remember what the thickness of this thing is, and rather than move my table so I can get in there with my calipers, I'm just gonna use this depth gauge. Alright, so I'm going to set this depth gauge, and then I'm going to use the tail end of my calipers to figure out what that is exactly. Alright, so this is 500 thousandths thick. So right now, when I bring my quill down till it hits the depth stop, I'm just above that top surface. So if I leave 50 thousandths, no, I'm sorry, 100. I'm going to leave 100 thousandths thickness at the end, so the hole ends up still being a blind hole. So that means I can bring up the knee 400 thousandths. 400 thousandths. I'll lock my knee. X and Y are already locked. So now, if I did this right, theoretically, I should be able to just drill down until the quill stop stops my progress, and that should not break through the other side. That's it right there. I'm just going to move my table to get the drill bit positioned for the next hole. Lock the table. Now I'm not going to move anything because I'm going to tap that hole. Alright, I already started tapping this, and well, I'll tell you, having the fine feed hand wheel on this Wells Index machine really is handy for doing something like tapping. I've got my spring-loaded tap follower here. I've just got that all chucked up. That's a little point in the back of the tap. and I just keep, every once in a while, I give it a little bit of a turn and squeeze down on that. Now it just stopped dead right there. I just bottomed out, so what I want to do now is take that out and see if I have a tap for a bottoming tap and finish the hole that way. This is the first time I've used this little tap handle. I don't even remember where I got it from, but actually it's kind of nice. Let's see if I have a 1032 bottoming tap. I got quite a few 1032 taps, but none of them were genuine bottoming taps. But this one I just switched out to. They actually got almost like a sheared nose to it. It's got a little bit of a taper, but only a few starting threads. So I'll be able to clean up the very bottom of that hole with this tap. But the back of this tap doesn't have a hole in it, so I couldn't use my follower directly, and I have to change from this style tap handle. But that's fine, that way I can just use this tap, keep this tap in here, do this hole, and switch out again. That's it, stops right, maybe a little bit. So there's that little bit at the end there that I'm cleaning up. You can feel it. That feels like it's bottomed out right there. Okay. One down, one to go. It looks pretty good. That's it. Just the right amount of feel there. Push it too hard, snap the tap off in the hole, and then you get a whole other problem. Alright, let's see if these screws are too long. Nope, this ain't the right size. Well, there you go. Started, let's get the right size in there. Nope, not going to be too long. They're going to be just right. How do you like them apples? Alright, so now I want to, let's see. I know I want to ease these edges, but I think before I do that, I'm probably going to want to locate my handle hole, which is going to have to go over here. And I haven't figured out yet what I'm going to do for a handle. Most likely I'm going to end up having to do something like a cap screw through a little metal tubular piece or something. Well, in retrospect, I wish I hadn't cut this groove all the way around. I wish I had left the groove in the area where, in one area here, where the wheel doesn't sit. And like right in here, just a little area right here. If I had left this filled in, then I'd have a lot more meat to thread in my stud to hold my handle. So since I didn't do that, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my hole right in the middle of this slot, so that if I screw something in from the front, if I want, I could put a little piece of metal or a nut or something down in this groove for it to thread into to give it more heft. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Alright, I'm just gonna send drill for the hole. Type plan on putting in this thing. Why, for some reason, that center drill is not turning true. This is the same chuck that's been working perfectly fine up until now, so something's not kosher. Better. Okay, so I decided to look at the little handle that the previous owner had made for this hand wheel, and just to give me some inspiration or some ideas. And looking at this handle, I'm not sure what he did here for this pin in the center. I don't know if it's threaded in or just pressed fit into that hole. But the first thing I noticed about it is that I like the little detail he did here, where it's kind of belled out at the end. But what I don't like is how the whole head of this retaining pin or screw sits way out here, out in front of it. And when you go to grab it, you can actually, it's kind of an awkward thing. And what I'm thinking I want to do is I probably want to make something along the lines of this, but maybe I would make this rear part a little longer and have this head actually recessed, so that this would actually be completely covered by this outer part right here. And I already looked at size-wise. I think this size screw would be optimal for my application. So I'm going to base my design off of this screw. So that's going to dictate what kind of dimensions I'm going to have for length, diameter, stuff like that. So I think what I want to do is I want to start to put together a little drawing so I can have an idea how I'm going to go about it doing this. Alright, so I looked at the length of the handle on the tail stock hand wheel, which is larger and probably is the same size as what the original apron handle was. And that's probably a little larger than what the original handle was on the hand wheel for the cross slide, because the cross slide hand wheel was smaller. So it would make sense that this handle is smaller also. So the one that's on there now, the homemade one that's on the apron hand wheel, it really is small. I want something that you can grab onto a little bit easier, but that isn't too obtrusive. So I've settled for a overall length of 1 3/8, which is 1.375. I also figure there's a possibility I might end up having a jam nut in this design. In other words, this might thread into here, and I might want to have a jam nut on the outside here that actually helps lock this in place. And that jam nut will be partially obscured by the handle here. So this is a piece of stock that I found, and what's nice about this is it's plenty long enough, I think, so that I can there's my overall length, and so I can put almost 50% of this stock into the chuck on the lathe, and then the diameter of this stock is 3/4. So as far as the amount of length that I can have out of the lathe, and that's going to probably work out just about right. This has been drilled and tapped on this side already part way, but I can see that that's not far enough in that it's going to cause a problem for me. So I can I'll just put this side in the chuck, and I'll do all of my machining on this side. Alright, so I've got my grooving and cutoff tool on the holder right now, because the first operation I'm going to do is I'm going to just cut a groove at the the end of the piece, at the end of where the handle's going to be, closest to the hand wheel. And I just want to do that so that I have a reference, so I know exactly where I'm turning up to. So the first thing I got to do is I got to square the tool up. And so to square the tool up, I'm just I loosen up the tool post a little bit, and I run this side face of the holder right up against the front face of the chuck, and make sure that that's right up against it, so there's no gap here. And then that should be square. I stole this trick from one of Keith Fenner's earlier videos. Figure if it's good enough for Keith, it's good enough for a noob like me. Alright, so next thing I gotta do is I'm gonna figure out exactly what I'm gonna do for figuring out how to get this over. And I think the easiest way is probably gonna be to just figure out what the width of this cutter is. Bring this over so I'm just touching the end. Right there. And now we're just going to move the apron this way. Basically, the length, that total length that I want, which is the 1.375, plus the width of the cutter. And that'll put this right-hand edge of the cutter right where I want it. So how am I going to do that? Well, I don't have a travel dial or anything like that on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an indicator. Yeah, I'll stick an indicator right here on a magnet mount, and I'll use that to run it over. Alright, so I use my long throw indicator, and I put it to the right of the apron because on the left-hand side of the apron I actually don't have enough, because of this big rod that sticks out of the back, I don't have enough room to actually put it between here and the tool tray. So what I did was I just made sure that it's compressed enough so that I can now move the carriage this way and know when I hit my magic number of 1.375. So I know I've got to go 10 revolutions to get to my 1-inch mark. I also have this sub-dial here, 2 sub-dials on this particular start indicator. This is a really nice indicator. I like this one. It's one of my better scores over the years of buying tools. So we're going to go... and now I gotta go 375 thousandths. There we go, right there. So right at that point there, I'm gonna lock my apron. As soon as I figure out where I put my wrench down. Oh, I had it in my hand when I went back over to the workbench. And put it down. Alright, so lock the apron right there. And so later I'm going to want to come back to this same notch that I'm cutting now and cut it off at that point. Alright, so I'm going to run this in. And, you know, just for good measure, why don't I, alright, set my calipers to 1.375. And I'm glad I did that because, that's not right. Something's wrong. Oh, I can see exactly what's wrong. I remember I was talking about the width of the cutter. That's exactly how much this is off by. The width of the cutter. Oh, and of course I can't get the width of the cutter now that I have the I have it in its position there. Alright, so I could just start over, back this all the way out, get the width of the cutter, have that in hand. Could take the width off of one of the other blades. They're all covered in cosmoline, or whatever that stuff is. Or the other thing I could do, which probably is what I should have done in the first place, went through a lot of trouble to set that, well, not a lot of trouble, but I went through the trouble of mounting that on a mag mount so I could do this, and it just occurs to me now that I could just hold my my tailpiece of my calipers on here and do it this way. And I've got the apron locked, so let's unlock that. I'm just curious if that's a 1/4-inch cutter. Zero the indicator and see how far it goes over. Well, I'm not even touching that anymore. I guess I didn't set my dial indicator close enough to this way. Lock the apron again. Oh, it just occurred to me that I had the camera still focused on the dial indicator during that. So basically what I did was I set my calipers to 1.375, locked my calipers, and then I used this projection depth gauge doohickey on the bottom of the caliper here, the tailpiece. Held this flat against the outside face of my piece and ran this over until it just touches the side of the cutter, and decided that that's good enough for me. And it looks like I've still got clearance here to make my cut. Not a bad idea to rotate the truck by hand initially just to see, double check. Alright, that looks good. Let me get, now this is interesting. I was watching, I forgot his name. Well, his first name's Tom, but I was watching the channel Tom's Techniques, and there's a lot of good information on there. And I was watching him doing the cutoff process, and he was talking about cutting off, not with a carbide cutter like I've got, but just with a regular high-speed steel blade. In the, but he was talking about that really. He said you really got to have a rigid tool post like this, even a cheap import, as opposed to the lantern style tool post. That rigidity was the key, squaring up was the key. But when he talked about lubrication, he said ideally that, you know, if you've got like a flood coolant system or something like that, where you can just flood this thing with coolant, then that's what you obviously want to do. But point he was making was, if all you're doing is using a brush, you're really not going to get the coolant on there. You're not going to get the lubricant or the coolant in there that you need, that small amount. But the idea being that you really need something that you can actually, you know, really kind of keep the lubricant flowing while you're doing this. So I thought that was interesting, because last time I did a cutoff, when I was testing out this cutoff blade, all I had was the brush. And actually what happened was I was using one of those acid brushes, and the bristles started to actually melt. They're probably nylon. And the heat of the cutting action was actually just causing them to get all deformed. And I think they were actually melting from the heat. Alright, kind of hard to get the camera in a position to give a good shot and not have the tripod completely in my way. If I had it on the back side of the lathe, that would be easier, but then the problem, good angle to get a shot from, but then I have trouble working the controls of the camera. If this camera had remote capability, that would be sweet. All right. Better.